Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me. As always, the NFL Draft is just a little over a week away. Here at Saturday to Sunday, we continue to cover it wire to wire. If you missed the most recent episode with Sigmund Bloom of Football Guys, make sure you check that out. We have a guest tomorrow from Football Guys, Matt Wallman of the RSP, but tonight we are talking quarterbacks. And we are excited to have on first-time guest here at Saturday Sunday, special guest, Cory Kinnan of the Daft on Draft podcast. Cory, welcome to the Saturday Sunday Football Podcast.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into this quarterback class, which is an interesting quarterback class to say the least, just maybe since this is your first time here, just give my audience a little bit of a background on what you've been doing with these prospects, where your work can be found. We'll talk about it at the end again, but I also just like to introduce, my listeners to who's going to be on the show. So just a little bit how you got into this, or just anything you want to share.
Yeah, so getting into this, I just got bored after I finished grad school. So I was like, I need a new hobby, and I have always loved football. So, I've been doing this since about 2017, 2018 now. Again, most of my work can be found on Daft on Draft.football. It's my Substack where I host most of my draft content. I also do chart quarterbacks and write up some analysis for reception perception as well. I know you mentioned you had Matt Harmon on the show, so Matt Harmon's site there. And so I do all the work on quarterbacks for reception perception. But on Daft on Draft.football, I have my own metric that I've kind of created since 2021 called weighted on target percentage. And so you can find all of those numbers on there as well. And the work that I do on quarterbacks is, I would say, pretty extensive. So I hope that I don't disappoint in this conversation.
Yeah, guys, make sure you're checking out all his great work and supporting him at his sites, and check out the reception perception. Yeah, Matt's usually a regular guest yearly here at Saturday Sunday post draft, talk about the wide receivers, but I'm excited to have you on tonight to talk about this quarterback class. So before we get into individuals, maybe just an overarching thought on what you think of this quarterback class. I know it's so unfair to compare it to last year because last year was such a unique special class, but just overall general thoughts on this quarterback class.
Yeah, I don't necessarily love it as a whole. We're going to see some quarterbacks get taken where I don't think they should get taken, including at the top. So I think it's pretty on par with maybe, man, what's a good comp? I want to say like 2013, the Geno year, or even like 2016, which would have been like the Goff Wentz year. I think it's probably pretty on par with those years in terms of talent. And looking back, and Goff has carved out a really good career, but I don't know if you'd go back and say like Jared Goff and Carson Wentz were deserving of going number 1 and number 2 overall. Although Jared Goff has certainly lived up to the career of if you could say that any of these quarterbacks would have the career of Jared Goff, you would take them number 1 overall and not think twice about it. But so I kind of think that it falls into kind of that kind of tier in terms of quarterback talent in this class.
Yeah, and I think that's the general consensus out there, that it's better than the Kenny Pickett year, but it's not last year. It's not a great quarterback class. So let's start at the top. Cam Ward, it sounds like almost 100% he's going to be a tight end. Thoughts on Cam Ward as the prospect? Do you think he warrants going at the top of this draft? Since you've been doing this so long, if you have a general idea or definitive idea of where you would have placed him with last year's group of quarterbacks, maybe share that as well.
Yeah, so I am in the minority. I don't know if you watch Arrested Development or have watched Arrested Development at all, but the clip of Tobias where it's like, there's dozens of us. I'm in the minority where I am a Shedeur Sanders QB1 truther, and I know there are only dozens of us left. So that's kind of where I'm at. And using my weighted on target percentage metric, which is a metric that looks to measure ball placement and accuracy to levels of the field, and then weight them appropriately to levels of the field that create more explosive plays that take a little bit more arm talent and a little bit more juice to get it to those levels of the field. And Cam Ward would be the second lowest weighted on target percentage of any quarterback taken in the first round since 2022. So with that being said, and that's only to Kenny Pickett and Anthony Richardson. And Anthony Richardson, of course, has alien-like tools, but everybody knew as well he started 12 games in college and was coming to the NFL as kind of a rough projection that would need some work. And so that's where I don't love the projection of Cam Ward going first overall, where he's not going to have the opportunity to sit for a year. I would love it if he had the opportunity to go and sit for a year, but they just signed Kyle Allen, and that's kind of their plan at backup. I think they're going to probably try to trade Will Levis either during the draft or pretty closely after the draft. So Cam Ward's going to go into a situation where there isn't really any receiver talent either. Like they had DeAndre Hopkins, who they traded. They have Calvin Ridley, who wasn't particularly good last year. And then all of their other talent are, Traylon Burks, who hasn't really panned out. Westbrook Akine signed elsewhere in free agency. So that wide receiver room is really barren. I do like Chigo Okonkwo at tight end. And then that running back room is Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard. Not really a true blue collar running back either to kind of take the workload off of him. Those are two other kind of, they'll help him out in the passing game, and they'll come in relief and provide a pretty solid core. But again, I don't think there's that fear instilling back to really take that pressure off of him either. I'm glad the Titans have invested a lot of resources in their offensive line. We're talking about a first-round pick last year, first-round pick in 2023. A lot of money on a left tackle that, maybe didn't warrant that much money. But that's how free agency works. And Dan Moore. So they have invested a lot up front to try to make this a conducive situation for a rookie quarterback. I worry about his play style. I worry about the talent around him. In terms of his play style, I really struggle with the projection of guys who prefer to play like on what I would say on the fringes rather than in structure. A lot of his in structure work is heavy play action, heavy RPO work, where he can spot throw, where he can get the ball out quick. When he is kind of forced to sit back and read it out a little bit, that's where he gets a little antsy and wants to extend plays and wants to get out to the boundaries and wants to let things develop down the field before taking shots. I think we saw a little bit of the tendencies for Cam to play some hero ball, and for better and for worse. I think there's a throw against Louisville where he rolls out to his left and throws an absolute dart to the back of the end zone. But he's still going to try to do some of that across his body stuff that's gotten him into a lot of trouble. 50 career fumbles is a big number as well. So the ball security issues while he's trying to stand back in there. And I've even seen some things like the game ending sack against Georgia Tech is a 3-man front where he's trying to get out against a 3-man front. It's just like, dude, you got to stand in there. You got to try to read it out a little bit longer, I think. So what I see with guys like that, and we saw it with Caleb Williams, who also loved to live on the fringes and loves to play outside of structure and things like that, is those guys get really sped up at the NFL level, and that doesn't make the transition super easy. Not to say that Cam Ward can't do it, not to say that Cam Ward isn't going to be a good NFL quarterback. I would have loved for him to have been drafted into a situation where that he didn't have to start right away, and he did kind of have a little bit of runway to get his feet wet into an NFL system, into an NFL playbook before being thrown out there. But that doesn't seem like it's going to be the situation. And we're talking about the Titans as well with the head coach who, they always seem to stagger their head coach and GM hiring and never align them. So if I had to guess, like that GM's probably going to fire him and hire his own guy next year anyway. So that's not super conducive for a rookie quarterback either.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up some interesting points, and I'm glad to the perspective because we have seen this momentum, I feel like, shift since the season where it doesn't feel like any of the flaws or concerns have been talked about with Cam Ward at all. It's like once he established himself as, for the draft Twitter out there and the mainstream media, as their QB1, I feel like we haven't heard a lot of people poke anything in his game. And then on the flip side, when we'll get to Sanders momentarily, that's all we've heard is the negatives and the concerns and the flaws when it comes to Shedeur Sanders. On Cam Ward, would you have had him ahead of any of the quarterbacks from last year, or your concerns would have put him behind even Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and JJ McCarthy? I'm assuming behind the big three from last year.
Yeah, definitely behind the big three from last year. I think a lot of people want to say like, well, look at what Jaden Daniels did, but like, I don't think people understand how good Jaden Daniels was at LSU, standing in structure, throwing with pressure on his face. And it helps, he had 2 top receivers in college football last year as well. But like, that doesn't take away from his ability to find backside digs, to read it out in structure, step up into pressure. And he's the most accurate quarterback I've charted ever as well. So that certainly helps too. I would probably put him in the same tier as like JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix. I don't know if I would put him, I'd probably put him above both of those guys. It'd be pretty close, like those 3 guys, but definitely not ahead of Williams, Williams, May, Daniels, Nix. So probably stacked right in the middle somewhere in there. But yeah, that's probably where I would place him.
Yeah, and let's take this to Sanders, who is your QB1. He is for my side too. I have it. Probably a little closer than you. I have it like more of like a 1A, 1B, but I have been on the Sanders camp as QB1 as well. I'm also a diehard Giants fan, so it is it is one of those interesting scenarios. The tea leaves maybe spinning back to the Giants because they're going out to Colorado for a private meeting. It seemed like they were off him at number 3. I still think it could be Carter at 3 and a trade up back in for Sanders. But let's talk about Sanders a little bit as a prospect. What do you like about him? While I do like him, I do have some concerns that his ceiling is somewhere on the Geno Smith, Brock Purdy, Tua kind of spectrum, and I don't know if that's worthy of the 3rd pick if you're passing on a blue chipper. So a little bit on Sanders, and then maybe a little bit big picture based on your takes. Would you think he warrants going as high as pick 3, maybe to the Giants?
Yeah, so there are definitely some concerns there, and I think it starts with his arm talent. I think he passes the threshold. It's not like he has a subpar arm, but I do think I would probably tag it as like average plus. Probably like to me, like he's very Jared Goff-ish. I think he can have a career like Jared Goff. I think he's probably a little bit of a better athlete than Jared Goff, but Shedeur Sanders isn't a spectacular athlete either. Neither is Cam Ward, though. Neither of those guys are tremendous athletes with their lower halves. Cam just has the absurd arm flexibility, arm talent, arm velocity to make some things happen and can feather a ball over the middle of the field like crazy. And I think Shedeur has some of that stuff too. But I think people are overblowing the pocket stuff a little bit. Yeah, there are some pocket drifting tendencies there. But if you go back to 2023 to 2024, you can see a stark improvement in those pocket drifting tendencies. And what I will say for Shedeur is that he is the hardest quarterback that I've ever evaluated in terms of parsing out what is his tendencies versus what is the structure around him causing him to do some of those things, like drifting in the pocket, bailing a little bit early. I did see him use his legs a little bit more in a positive manner this year than before. So he, trying to step through and pick up yards, but playing behind that offensive line isn't easy. Playing in that structure with Pat Shermer at Colorado wasn't easy. They almost ran exclusively like very wide split trips. Like it felt like that's all they were running. No pre-snap motion, so everything's really static. So it's up to him to figure out what is going on, pre-snap with the defensive side of the ball with no pre-snap indicators to help him out. So I do think he was just running the whole show there at Colorado without a lot of structure around him. And I think that's impressive. Like, I really do think that's impressive. Like, what happens if you insulate him in an NFL offense? And he does the same thing and he elevates and runs the whole show there as well. I think a lot of that probably was Pat Shermer feeling like he needed to water some stuff down due to the talent on that offensive side of the ball around Shedeur. I don't know if he thought that was an indicator of what Shedeur would be able to handle cognitively as well or not. But everything I've heard about Shedeur is that he basically ran the show in practice. Like any audibles being called at the line of scrimmage, any protections being called with Shedeur. And again, I think we are discrediting just how accurate of a thrower he is and just how good he is in structure. And throwing those backside routes, even sometimes in the face of pressure. Like there's a throw against K-State. The balls ended up dropped over the middle, but I mean, he's getting smacked in the face and he's throwing a 15-yard backside dig, and that's just not an easy throw to make. He would be my second most accurate quarterback to only Jaden Daniels that I've charted over the past 3 years as well. So I think there is a lot to like about Shedeur Sanders. Again, there are a lot of worries. And again, it's hard to parse out what worries are his tendencies versus like what he felt like he needed to do to survive in that offense, behind that offensive line and within a really uncreative offensive structure that didn't do a whole lot for him to help him out. But I think we're overlooking his wits and we're overlooking his accuracy. And if you have those two things, you can play in the NFL. So that's kind of where I'm at with Shedeur Sanders.
Sanders is the guy I've comped a lot of bit. It's interesting how different the narrative is around Sanders compared to where it was 2 years ago with Bryce Young. Bryce Young was a better anticipatory thrower. I will give him that. But at the same time, he had the best infrastructure pretty much you could have around him at Alabama compared to Sanders. I'm not familiar with your work from when you did Bryce Young. Maybe is Sanders on a level of Bryce Young in your eyes, or is he clearly below that? Because I feel like people everyone seemed to be all in on Bryce Young. We didn't hear a lot of negatives about the size and those concerns and the arm talent or the athleticism. He wasn't a game breaker. He moved around the pocket, but Young wasn't a runner. But all of a sudden, you hear all of those narratives around Sanders, and I just don't know if it's because of who Sanders is and who his dad is and all the hoopla that's always surrounding that. But none of these were questions I feel being raised on a consistent basis when Bryce Young was coming out a couple of years ago. And I don't think on the football field, there's this gaping difference between those two prospects.
Yeah, I think the last name does have a lot to do with it, and I don't think people love like the demeanor of Shador. But like, if you're taking over a locker room at an NFL level, I don't think there's any other demeanor I'd rather have. Like, those are the kind of guys that I love in a locker room. But I think Shador's got a better arm than Bryce does. But I think Bryce is honestly a much more creative passer, like the ability to extend off platform to find some passing windows with some arm flexibility, some things like that as well. Bryce had a really good understanding pre-snap versus post-snap too, like being able to read out and anticipate rotations coming from the back end and just knowing where to go with the football. So a really efficient thrower. But I do think the arm talent questions are 100% there, and we've seen it in Carolina. Like, he can't really drive the football, and those things were there at Alabama. But we've seen quarterbacks who can't really drive the football, who are really good anticipatory throwers, make it. Bryce wasn't great at navigating pressure in Carolina. He kind of picked it up there at the end of the year, but I think that's a big thing too. Like, where I think Shador's arm is most on par with is probably Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow does not have an elite arm. He probably has an average arm, if we're being completely honest. But Joe's so good at navigating pressure, at being creative within the pocket to avoid pressure and throwing the ball with anticipation. It helps that they've surrounded him with the offensive talent that he has in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, that he can just kind of throw it up sometimes too. But like, if you're throwing it up with anticipation, you're anticipating that a defender's not going to have his eyes turned to the football. So I've never ever comp a quarterback to like Joe Burrow's smarts, his anticipation, like what he can do pre-post snap and what he's able to digest and diagnose, and then almost like a computer analyze within a 4 or 5 second window is unbelievable and probably untouched at the NFL level. And that's why he is so good despite those lack of tools. So I would never throw a Burrow comp at Sanders, but like Sanders is arm talent. Sanders is, if you put him behind an NFL offensive line, can he be a little bit more creative in the pocket? I think that's the case. Yes. But I do think, I think like Dollar Tree Joe Burrow is maybe a good comp for Shador Sanders, but I do think the arm is better than Bryce Young's. Bryce Young gets a nod in like how creative a passer he is, though, and how creative of a passer he was at Alabama.
Yeah, Young was a extreme problem solver, like a point guard distributor in a variety of ways. But I do think it's interesting that for him, we didn't hear the size or the arm talent concerns nearly as much as we seem to be hearing with Sanders. Let's turn to another quarterback. I'm really interested to kind of hear your takes on Jalen Milroe, because you talked about you looking for a quarterback to play in structure and you like Sanders more than Ward. Milroe has these tools, but we don't see him as comfortable playing in structure a lot. I think that is something that needs development and progression. What's your thoughts on Milroe? Can he improve in those areas that make him warrant of maybe a top 40, top 50 pick? Or are we talking about an athlete playing quarterback that's going to struggle to have a shot to make it at the next level?
I think he does some really nice things as a quarterback with his eyes. I mean, that Georgia game, they threw the kitchen sink at him, and he was anticipating blitz after blitz after blitz and knowing exactly where to go with the football. He isn't a quarterback who's afraid to stand in and get his eyes, like work his eyes back to 2 to 3 and make the throw. Again, the accuracy is an issue. Kind of his hesitancy to step up. He kind of tends to like not climb, and he'll sit 6-7 yards deep in the pocket. But I do think there is a pocket foundation, a pocket presence to work with Jalen Milroe. And then it also helps that he has a 4.4 speed as well. What kind of worries me about Jalen Milroe is, one, the accuracy. I have him charted about 60%, which is a little bit higher than Anthony Richardson, but not great, like pretty below average. Average for me is 64%. So he's sitting below average there accuracy wise. But it's also, he doesn't have a lot of arm flexibility. Like if you watch him, it's like there's a board, like a 2x4 tied to his arm. Like there's just no flexibility to it. So he doesn't really have the ability to manipulate passing windows with those arm angles. And he doesn't really have a lot of touch on the football. It's a very linear football that he throws. And so can he develop into a more rotational thrower? Can he develop into a guy who maybe develops some more arm flexibility? That's not something that we've really ever seen passers really be able to create if it's not there. Like for the most part, if you have a rubber band arm, you have a rubber band arm. And if you don't, you don't. So I'm interested to see that, if that's something that can change. But I have seen progressions from Jalen Milroe from the Senior Bowl to the Combine to his pro day in his lower half mechanics, in his ability to throw the football on time, to throw a catchable football. He's working with Jordan Palmer. Everything I've heard about Jalen Milroe is that he's a really hard worker. So that is a guy that I'm willing to buy in like a Jalen Hurts kind of range in the second round there. Because again, Jalen Hurts is one of those guys who also doesn't have a flexible arm. He's got really one throwing angle that he can throw to. He doesn't throw a super feathered football over the middle of the field with touch. What Jalen Hurts does, though, Jalen Hurts does is he throws a really beautiful deep ball, and that's kind of where the strength of Jalen Milroe's charting profile is, as well as when he's throwing the ball down the field. I do think there's a good foundation there. You're still taking a risk if you're drafting him, and especially if you're drafting him with the hopes of developing him into a starting quarterback. I do think it's probably worth that risk in the second round, not before then. But probably that second round Jalen Hurts-ish kind of shot where, they had Carson Wentz under contract, but they're like, well, listen, we might need a way out of this. That's kind of the pathway I would see for Jalen Milroe as well. But again, with Jalen Hurts, the Eagles did an unbelievable job of insulating him with the exact talent that operates under his skill set as well. Like, his skill set is throwing a deep ball. They got him perhaps the best deep ball receiver in the NFL, and AJ Brown, who will bully any cornerback down the field. Jalen Hurts is really good extending with his legs. They got him a receiver in Devontae Smith, who works green grass better than any receiver that I've watched so far in the NFL, of working their way back to quarterback, knowing where to sit in green grass and find those holes for Jalen Hurts to throw to. So, and then the offensive line he plays behind as well really helps out as well there. But so that's a shot that you can take with Jalen Milroe. You just have to also know that the Eagles built probably a 99th percentile roster around Jalen Hurts as well to make this work, and that's not always going to be the case at the NFL level.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with Milroe and the ceiling aspect that he brings. One question to tie to two guys that we just discussed together, going back to Shedeur Sanders. Would you, obviously the Giants are a quarterback needy team and you like Sanders, would you like him enough to take him at 3 over at a blue chipper like Abdul Carter? Or do you think Carter and then take a ceiling upside spin at a guy like Milroe in the second round would be a more attractive option for a team like the Giants?
Yeah, so for a team like that, what's so hard is like, does this team have direction? If I could like wholeheartedly say, yes, I believe in the direction of this team, take the quarterback. But it kind of feels like Joe Shane and Brian Dable are both entering like a year where like, oh, you could have been fired last year. How long is your leash going into this year? From an ownership perspective, do you want to burn a 3rd overall pick on a quarterback when you might be bringing in an entire new regime last year who might not like that quarterback? If this was a situation like, I'm trying to think of a good example here of a team kind of picking at the top.
New Orleans.
Like New Orleans. I mean, that's kind of a new head coach too, with no assets to work with around him. So New Orleans would make me a little skeptical too. Like Denver. I mean, Denver with Bo Nix last year, like they clearly bought into Sean Payton. There's clearly talent on that roster. They said, let's just take the quarterback at 12. I mean, that's picking 12 versus 3 as well. And the value range from 12 to 3 is a chasm as well. We're talking about, top 10 to 12 is a big chasm. But I think that's probably a good example of a situation where, like, if Chicago didn't have Caleb Williams, like that's a case where say like they just build up the offensive line. They have Ben Johnson. Yeah, take the quarterback. The Giants, you might have a new head coach next year. You might have a new GM next year. That's a case where I'd say like if ownership is already like ownership almost fired these guys last year. So if I were ownership in the Giants case, I'd say take the good talent, like take the blue chipper this year. And if I have to move on from these guys that I almost moved on from last year, there's no harm in me maybe needing to go burn another asset next year on a quarterback if this new head coach I hire, or you're hamstringing a head coach by saying you have to make it work with this quarterback. That's a lot to go into for a team like the Giants. So if I were the Giants, I'd probably just take Abdul Carter. to be completely honest,
it's such an interesting thing because even as a Giants fan, I feel like I want the quarterback and I like Sanders, but at the same time, I agree with everything you just said. And it's like to give up Abdul Carter makes it so much tougher. It's a weird way of like, I don't want him at 3, but if the Giants were picking at 4 and we were comparing Sanders to like Will Campbell or Mason Graham or Jalen Walker, I'd be like, yeah, give me Sanders, because like those other guys are good players. They're not at the level of Abdul Carter. It's like that one pick difference, like seems like it feels different in terms of like a regime and like a team where they might have a lame duck head coach and GM, and Carter just seems like this be such a ceiling, this great prospect, one of the only blue chippers, with Travis Hunter and probably Ashton Genty in this draft. So it's one of those fascinating things where I think the Giants are interested. I don't know if it's at 3 or maybe a trade up, which I think is the scenario that most Giants fans want, is take Carter and then find a way to get Sanders also. So we'll see if they can make that happen, obviously, on draft night. Let's take this to Jackson Dart, who I think some people are really into him. Other people are like evaluating him off of that scheme, leaves a lot to, be imagined. Where do you kind of fall on him? How hard of an eval is he based on your charting process and what that scheme is? Is it trickier than a lot of these other prospects?
I don't think so. Like, I think he's one of the easier evals, and I like, he's one of those guys, and I don't want to be harsh to Jackson Dart, but he's like one of the guys that I don't understand where the hype is coming from. For my charting, what I don't do, which I just started this year and went back and removed all of those games from previous charts, is I don't chart FCS and G5 competition for top tier guys unless it's a quarterback who is a G5 guy and that's the only games you have, right? Then yeah, I'm gonna have to chart those guys. But with Jackson Dart, if you remove his G5 and FCS competition level of play, his weighted on the target percentage drops 5%, which is a big number. It drops from above average to below average. So if there were tools there to develop, I would be like, yeah, like, sure, you could take a shot that, it's because he's playing in this juvenile offense and, one of the easier college offenses for quarterbacks. But even with that, like, with it being one of the more, they go up tempo to keep it easy on the quarterback. They spread it all out to give a lot of green grass for our quarterback to kind of peer into. And I just don't feel like Jackson Dart's entirely on time. I don't think he entirely sees it still, even in an offensive like that with a pretty thin playbook. And so when I think about insulating him into an NFL team, I'm like, man, is he going to be able to get this? And he is only 21. So like, I'm not going to bury the kid and say he has no shot, but like, I don't see that from a tools aspect. I mean, again, he's probably in that average plus tier in terms of arms and mobility. From a cognitive aspect, like if he's not getting it in this kind of offense, that really makes me struggle. And then when you look at his third and obvious passing situations, and then like ball in his hand late in the game, down one score, it's all really ugly. Like it's all the Kentucky game is really ugly. The Florida game is really ugly. So like, again, I'm not trying to bury Jackson Dart, but like, I don't see it from an NFL perspective. Because he's going to have to rework his entire game from the ground up as well, going from all gun to under center to drop back stuff as well. And it's just like, if the tools were there, I'd feel better about it, but I don't even feel like the tools are really even there. So to me, it feels like, well, what's the upside? Where's the upside with Jackson Dart?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I struggle with him, and I would much prefer taking a swing on Jalen Milroe and what we talked about before to Jackson Dart. And it's kind of interesting that Jackson Dart has all this momentum. Sounds like he's going to be a round 1 pick. Giants are not a team that I want to be making that pick. So I'm hoping that's not where they go. But it sounds like there seems to be enough people who believe in those traits, which, like I said, I don't think the traits are like elite traits. I think they're like average plus or maybe good, a couple traits in terms of the physical traits. But then there's just so much left to be desired. So I'm right there with you. What about Tyler Shough? Obviously, he's like 26. Once he plays the first down in the NFL, obviously been in college a long time. This year, he had some moments. He does some nice things in terms of the arm talent. He can throw it from different platforms a little bit. So what you're charting of Tyler Shough?
Yeah, so Tyler Shough's one of those quarterbacks, like I think, or the Giants or like the Browns, because the Browns are like keying in on Travis Hunter. It feels like they're pretty keyed in there for a team that doesn't want to reach for a quarterback this year, but wants to maybe bridge a gap to a quarterback next year. Like I think Tyler Shough would be a good 3rd round option for a team like the Giants or the Browns, who neither of those teams are going to start that quarterback this year. But they are both in situations where they'll be facing some turnover in the quarterback room again next year. So, if they draft a rookie, like a top end rookie at the top of the draft next year, can Tyler Shough be a guy that bridges you to that rookie quarterback? And then then you have a backup quarterback under contract for 3 years after 2025. I think that's a good situation for a quarterback like Tyler Shough. I don't see he's got a nice arm, a lot of velocity, a lot of arm angles, a lot of off platform. the dude was Justin Herbert's backup for 2 years in college, and Justin Herbert's been in the NFL for 5 years. Like that's kind of what we're talking about here with Tyler Shuck. So that's hard to get past. This is his first full season in 7 years that he played a full season in terms of being healthy enough to play or being a starting quarterback at the college level. That's hard to look past. And then like you can definitely tell that he's afraid to get hit. Like you can tell that the injury history is there. The way that he wants to dip out of structure, wants to dip out of pockets, kind of drifts a little bit, is always thrown on the run. There's not a lot of situations where he feels comfortable stepping up into, and that's hard because that's a mental thing. Like that's a mental thing that definitely injuries have taken a toll. And if you can't climb the pocket and if you can't throw under pressure from structure at the NFL level, like you can't play. Like, but I'm okay with that if you don't get a guy like Jalen Milroe round 2 and you want to kick the can on a round 1 quarterback for another year. I think Shuck can be that backup that you have under contract for 4 years. And even if you don't want to start a rookie, then in 2026, week 1, start Shuck for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season until you want to bridge a gap until that rookie comes on the field. So that's kind of where I'm at with Shuck. I see the tools. I like the tools. A lot of skittishness that I think is a mental hurdle that I'm not quite sure how he overcomes, given his age, given how much injury history he has. So that's kind of where I'm at with Shuck.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on with the 3rd round. I'd be okay with. I think teams are trying to sell themselves on could be their next clear starting quarterback, and are thinking, early round 2, whether that's the Browns or the Giants or another team. The Jets have been kind of a lot of buzz lately here in New York that the Jets maybe really like him a lot in terms of the top of the 2nd round. That's where, like, top of the 2nd round, this draft is going to be loaded with really good defensive linemen, defensive tackles, edge rushers, great running backs are going to go on day 2. So it's like that early would scare me, because when you take a guy at the top of the 2nd, you're kind of believing in him that he could be a starting quarterback. Maybe Milroe's a little bit of a wild card, like we talked about, but like if you take another guy who doesn't have a clear developmental path, like based on physical traits, you're kind of saying we think he could be a starter. I'm not sure like that should be the mindset with Dart already, who's probably going to go round 1. Neither with Tyler Shuck as well. So it'll be interesting to kind of see if it's just the normal. Once upon a time, Malik Willis was going round 1, Matt Corral was going round 1, Desmond Ridder was going round 1, and we saw what happened on draft night. So it'll be interesting to kind of see if the buzz pre-draft doesn't match where we see them actually go on draft weekend, because it has happened before. Maybe some quick hitters on the remaining guys that have been pretty relevant. So maybe kind of take me through if you have some quick thoughts on Kyle McCord, Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, Quinn Ewers. You don't have to hit on all of them if you don't want to, but if any quick thoughts on maybe these guys, if there's guys you clearly like from that group, maybe even more than Dart and Shuck and stuff like that, please let my audience know.
Yeah, I like Will Howard, man. I do. With Will Howard, again, it's hard to parse out. Like, was his playoff stint, did he figure something out in the playoffs? Did they turn something over to him that they didn't turn over to him in the regular season, and he took the ownership of it and developed into something? He's 20. He's going to be 24. So like another guy we're talking about, like, well, why didn't it click until the very end of your 5th year? But his playoff football is really good football. And what I mean by really good football is like, this is NFL, like long-term backup spot starting quality football. I'm not saying Will Howard's going to come in and be a starting quarterback in the NFL, but like, Will Howard has a very Mason Rudolph-ish feel to him, where Mason Rudolph went in the 2nd round, and I think that's probably too early for Will Howard, but a Mason Rudolph-ish feel where, he's been a backup in the NFL for a half decade now, and he'll spot start games for you. And in 2023, like once Pickett got hurt and Mason Rudolph came in, is when the Steelers started winning football games. So like, I definitely think that Will Howard as a quarterback, when you're looking at a backup quarterback, you want a guy with a high floor. Like you want a guy, that if you have to turn the keys over to him for a short stint, that he can at least execute what you're putting in front of him. And that's what I see out of Will Howard. So he's definitely a guy I would take in the mid rounds, maybe late 3, early 4 into round 5. Is like, this is a long-term backup quarterback who can give you a decade-long spot starting kind of reps. Like Mason Rudolph is going to keep signing 1-year deals with teams, and he's going to bounce around and be a backup everywhere he goes. Like that's kind of how I feel about Will Howard. So I really like that. Quinn Ewers is starting to get some top 100 buzz again. And why? Like he's living off being the highest rated recruit ever still, kind of, because his tape at Texas has not been good. And he's had 3 injuries in 3 seasons. So I have some pretty big durability concerns about Quinn Ewers. And it's definitely affected his ability to drive the football. Like his velocity is almost all the way gone based on what it was when he was hyped up coming out of high school into Ohio State, into Texas. Like he's really struggling to throw some opposite hash out routes. He's really struggling to throw some deep posts, and we're starting to see some of those balls flutter in the air. And so I am kind of struggling to see. And then I don't think his pocket presence is particularly good as well. And I think if you go back and watch that Georgia game, Kelvin Banks is giving up sacks 6-7 seconds, like 4, 5, 6 seconds into the play, because Quinn Ewers is still sitting 7 yards deep in the pocket. And Banks is on the ground turning to him and like, what's going on? Like, climb through the pocket. And I think we've seen some hesitancy or some unwillingness for him to do that. And so I wouldn't draft Quinn Ewers, quite honestly. And the top 100 buzz is kind of wild to me. And I'm not quite sure like what NFL teams are kind of seeing there. And then Kyle McCord, I like Kyle McCord a little bit, but what I was talking about with Will Howard versus Kyle McCord is like, when you have a backup quarterback, you want to know that they have a high floor. And Kyle McCord, for as big as an arm as he has and how much he can rip it, like his floor is really low. So I think that would be I would struggle as a team to like have that guy as my backup quarterback, because I couldn't anticipate what he could give me on a Sunday. Will Howard, if I had to start him, I could probably anticipate what he could give me on a Sunday, and that's probably going 13 of 17 for a $185, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Like, you can live off of that. Kyle McCord might go out there and go 9 of 21 with 200 yards and 3 picks. So like, that's kind of where I would struggle as an NFL team, is like, do I like Kyle McCord enough to draft him and insulate him to see if some of these things can work? But when I think about like, man, if I had to throw Kyle McCord on the field as a head coach, as a play caller, I'd be really worried about like, well, what Kyle McCord am I going to get today? So that's kind of where I'm at with there. Dylan Gabriel, I just don't think he has the tools to be an NFL quarterback. Like, this is a guy that could go win UFL MVPs, could go in the Canadian League and do some stuff. I know a lot of people want to say like he could back up Tua Tagovailoa because they're both left-handed and then throw with a lot of anticipation. And I think Dylan Gabriel does do a good job of throwing with anticipation and getting the ball out quick. But I do worry about some of the placement stuff. I do worry about like the arm talent is not there, and he's 5'11", like he's 5'10". So there's a lot that's hard to overlook with Dylan Gabriel. I'm like, I don't know if this guy can hang at the NFL level.
Yeah, you make a lot of points. We start talking about these quarterbacks that we're looking for things to really like about them, but we see so many of these guys. Even the guys, it was a couple of years ago, we had that like run in like the 4th round. It was like the Ian Book, Jerron Hall, like there was like Aiden O'Connell, and then O'Connell started a little bit here or there. But there's really good players available in the 4th round, and like sometimes people are like in the 3rd round, definitely, that we're reaching on these quarterbacks, and so many of these day 3 quarterbacks and even some of the day 2 guys, they can't even materialize into backups in the league. So like we take these guys because we're so quarterback hungry, and the league is so quarterback hungry, but so many of them can't even materialize to be backups. And when those teams that took those guys at the top of the 4th round, like there was probably a lot of really good pieces who could have been maybe not even starters, but really good, valuable role players on a team. And a team took a shot on a guy like Ian Book and Jerron Hall and stuff like that. And these guys can't even materialize into average backups, let alone spot starter types. So I do think we always see this every year. And Quinn Ewers and Dylan Gabriel, yeah, they've generated this buzz where they could go like, round 3 or early round 4. And then it's like, they probably should be going later than that if you're just taking a stab on somebody somewhere on day 3. Cory, is there anybody I didn't talk about that you're even remotely intrigued with based on something from your charting or film watching that you would be like, yeah, 6th round, 7th round, why not? Let me take a shot on him. At that point, everything's a lotto ticket. Once you get to that, just like, let's get him. If we hit the 1 in 20 billion and we get a starter at like Brock Purdy, once upon a time happened. Is there anybody who you're even intrigued with late in the draft that we haven't talked about?
Not particularly, because like if you look at backup quarterbacks in the NFL, they're either early picks who didn't work out and now are backups, or they're veterans like in the back third of their career. So like nobody's drafting quarterbacks to be backup quarterbacks anymore. Like I'm struggling off the top of my head to even think of one where like who was drafted to be a backup quarterback. Like even Taylor Heineke was a UDFA who developed into a backup quarterback and now is a spot starter and now a veteran backup quarterback. Like, so like I think the Browns tried it with DTR and that clearly didn't work. Like now the Browns backup quarterback is Kenny Pickett, a former 1st round pick. Or if he's starting, it's Joe Flacco, a veteran former 1st round pick now at the end of his career. Marcus Mariota is now a journeyman backup, a former 1st round pick. Jameis Winston is a journeyman backup now. So, and I think Zach Wilson's kind of on that trajectory as well, as like this guy who is going to travel around and back up people now. So like, teams aren't drafting backup quarterbacks. So I'm pretty skittish on late round quarterbacks as it is, because I was like, what's the point when you can just sign a guy for $4 million who's has starting experience, and if you have to throw them in there, can kind of do it. I would say Max Brosmer maybe is the one quarterback then that I would mention, maybe in that same tier, maybe even above a guy like Dylan Gabriel or Quinn Ewers. I do like a lot about what Brosmer did at Minnesota this past year. So maybe Max Brosmer is a guy I'd throw in that conversation.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys that has a chance to be drafted late. I think Riley Leonard probably will go somewhere on day 3, but then Brosmer's an interesting guy. In one of my premium notebooks here, I try to project every single pick to be taken in the draft, and Brosmer's right on that border of, do I put him in my 257 in terms of guys who could be drafted? I think he's got a shot there. Right now, I kind of cut it off after Riley Leonard, but Brosmer's that next guy that if I add one more as I continue to modify up to draft weekend, he'd be the guy that I could see a team taking a stab on late in the draft. But I'm right there with you. These teams invest these 33 picks, and with the idea of being backups. But if you take a look at the landscape of the league, it's just not materializing. So in a class like this year, where there's going to be really good running backs and other guys all over, I think it's a good tight end class. There's going to be good tight ends and good running backs in round 4, round 5, round 6. It's like, do we really want to go pick our, Damian Martinez in round 5 or Riley Leonard in round 5? Like, to me, it should be a no-brainer between those guys. But I think teams are going to invest in the quarterback just because they're just hoping for that 1 in a billion, basically, lotto ticket that materializes into something either really good or at least a serviceable backup. But like you said, it's so hard to find that. And I think teams constantly make those picks, and they're wasted picks, really. And I think it'd be interesting to kind of see, after we had that little wave of teams trying to find a good backup quarterback so they don't have to pay it in free agency. But now with the price in free agency seems to have come down for backups, right? Joe Flacco, Jameis Winston. These are cheap deals on serviceable backup quarterbacks. So I wonder if that'll change the narrative a little bit. And maybe we don't even see some of these guys go that we talked about tonight if teams start to think with that mindset and change a little bit. It'll be fun to kind of watch that throughout draft weekend. So Cory, thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully we could kind of get this into the regular. I loved hearing your quarterback takes. So hopefully in the future we can get you back on here at Saturday, Sunday. But again, let my audience know where they can find all your work again, Twitter handle, all that stuff. So my audience could check your work out.
Yeah, on X, I am at Fake Cory Kinnan. And then Daft on Draft.Football is where most of my draft content lives. Quarterback analysis is at Reception Perception as well. So those are the big places. I am on Blue Sky as well. Daft on Draft.Football on Blue Sky. I'm trying to use it more regularly, but it's not great at it. But those are about the spots you can find me.
Guys, make sure you're going following Cory on X, checking out the podcast, checking out his work over at Reception Perception and the quarterback charting and everything he's doing over there. So on behalf of Cory, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.